Today, let's walk through the steps of making a tree skirt. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are sewing up this fun tree skirt. Now, this tree skirt is on a 4-foot tree, as you can see here, and the best part is there is a whole Etsy pattern available for this in my store. So for this tree skirt, you'll see that there are 3 different pattern pieces that come in the pattern and tutorial. The way that this tree skirt works is it's almost 3 different tiers, so it's 6 pieces that each have these 3 tiers in them, and then you kind of combine it all together. There's no curves, everything is a nice straight edge to make it a little simpler. Now the pattern pieces that come in the pattern are much more professional and clean looking. These are just my originals that I had used to do all of the testing and printing to make sure that the sizing was correct. Now I'm using 3 different types of fabrics. Each are quilting cottons. For this, I highly recommend using a woven material like a quilting cotton to make it a lot easier. Now to cut out the pattern pieces, we are cutting this out on the fold. So you're going to be taking your first color, so whatever your top tier is going to be, and lining up that edge, so that straight edge. It's going to say on the pattern piece cut on the fold. You're going to line up that cut on the fold edge with your folded fabric, and then when you undo this, you'll see that you now have a trapezoid piece. So now that we have one of these, you're going to be cutting out 5 more. So we are going to be cutting out 6 of these small trapezoids. So however you feel comfortable doing that, whether that's using fabric shears or a rotary cutter, you're just going to go through and cut out those 6 pieces. Once you have all 6 cut out, you can then move on to your middle tier. So the middle tier, very similar, it's just slightly bigger. So for this, you are going to be going through, cutting this fabric out on the fold. Now for the amount of fabric needed, the top you can get away with a fat quarter. For the middle tier, you're probably going to want about half of a yard of material, and then for that larger tier you're going to want probably about 3/4 to a yard of material, especially if you are trying to do any pattern matching. Always adjust to account for a little bit more fabric when you are doing pattern matching. So each tier is very similar, just cutting out 6 pieces from each tier on the fold, so then you get 6 trapezoids from each fabric, so small, medium, and large. Once you have those all together, now it is time for us to go through the process and start to pin these up. So to begin the process, we are going to be taking our top tier and our middle tier. So I have this laid out right now just with both those right sides facing up so you can see what it would look like. We are going to be joining those 2 edges though. So with the right sides together, you are going to fold that top tier down on top of the middle tier, and then we are just going to be pinning it across. So now we will repeat this for each of those 6 pieces so that you end up having 6 seams that we're sewing, so 1 for each piece. Now what I will say with this is because of how we are taking a smaller piece and kind of putting on top of a large piece, you'll see it had these little flaps. That's supposed to happen. You want that little overlap. So where those 2 lines are intersecting, that's where the seam's going to be starting. But once I have them all done, so you see I have all 6 pieces, I'm now going to go to my sewing machine, just using a straight stitch and a regular presser foot, and I'm going to sew all of this in place. So be sure when you are sewing that seam that you are backstitching at the beginning and end so that it's nice and secure, and then just taking your seam all the way through to sew the top and the middle tier together. So here's what it ends up looking like. It looks really nice and clean, and when you fold it over, you get like a really almost seamless finish on the side. So you can see here that little flap, I'm not really sewing through the flap at all. It's where that green and the white comes together is where my seam goes through. So now that I have this done for those 6, I'm going to go ahead and just attach the bottom layer to those 2 as well, so I can have this one piece complete. So very similar to before, you're folding with right sides together, that top portion onto the bottom portion, and then pinning it up right along that edge. Now for this is going to be very similar to the one that we just did, that you're going to have those little flaps that overhang so you can see where my finger's pointing. That is correct, you want those to be there, so don't worry that you did some sort of measurement wrong. That is how you want it to look, and then you're just going to take that seam all the way across. So I'm going to go through and just continue pinning these up so that I have all 6, and then I can go and take my seam. And then once you have it done, you'll see that you have all 3 pieces together, so it gets this really nice pyramid looking effect. So to start, I'm just going to continue doing this so that I can get the rest. So you see I have my needle lined up with where those 2 pieces are, and I'm just going to take that seam all the way through. I did around 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance for this. So the cat did oversee all of these. She thought they were good to go. So now with them all sewn up, we can go ahead and press all of this out. Now you could have pressed this out at each seam. I'm just going to do it all at once since my iron is in a different part of the house. So I just went through, pressed the seams open for each piece, and then once you have the seam open, this is what it'll look like from the back, so it's nice and flat and smooth. So what is now time to do is for us to start to join these together to make our tree skirt top. So with right sides together, you're going to take one piece and then match it with another piece. So as you can see here, the right sides of these are together, and then we are just going to be matching up one of these diagonal edges. So I'm using my pins, being sure that you're marking wherever these seams are that we had sewn before. So this is really when you want to make sure are matching. The nice part about this is because this is cut on that diagonal, your fabric will have a slight stretch to it if you're using quilting cotton, which will make it much easier to have those lined up. Then you're just going to take that seam all the way through. Now I'm going to repeat this process for the additional 4 pieces that we have, so to create 2 more pairs, matching along that diagonal edge, and then I'm just going to take that seam along that edge, so that at the end you have 3 pairs that we are sewing up that one edge for, and this will then allow us to begin the process of building out the tree skirt. Now for the seam, again, this is just using a regular straight stitch. I'm being sure that I am back stitching at the beginning and end, and then I did around a 3/8 seam allowance. Now when you open this up, you should be able to see that the pieces came together really well, so everything's looking good, and now I'm just going to repeat that process for the additional 2 pairs. Once you get those 3 seams done, you should now have your 3 pairs that are sewn together. So now it is time for us to go through and match these pairs up. So I have my one pair that I have facing up, and then I have another pair facing down. So with right sides together, I'm just matching these along one of the diagonals. So very similar to how we did before, I would then just take that straight stitch. And then what I am going to do is just match up the 3rd pair to this middle portion so that I can have the tree skirt completely ready to be sewn. So very similar process of just going through and matching up these edges, and then being sure that I am matching where those seams were for those tiers so that it all comes together really nicely. So now I'm just going to take these final 2 seams, and my tree skirt will actually, the top portion will be complete. And very similar to everything else, this is just a straight stitch, being sure that I'm back stitching at the beginning and end. So once you have that all ready to go, we're now just going to press all of those seams out, very similar to how we did before to get everything to be nice and flat and smooth. And then once you have it all pressed out, this is what your tree skirt top will look like from the back. So you can see everything looks good. There is this gap. That's how it's supposed to be because this is going to be more of like a 3D effect that we'll be laying on top of our tree. So that's not a problem. So now what we need to do is get the backing material for our tree skirt. So I'm using this red satin. I would not recommend it just because it does burn a little bit with your iron and it can be hard to use, but this is what I had on hand. The cat did approve of it, and after she did her initial rolling through, I was then able to lay everything out a lot better and just go through, and you're going to be cutting out the back so that it's the same size as your tree skirt top. Next, you are going to be adding some batting. So for our batting, what I've done is I have my tree skirt top with right sides together with my tree skirt bottom, and then I've placed this on top of my batting, and I then just cut out so that the batting is the same size as the tree skirt, and then I went through and pinned all of this up. Now on one of these straight edges, you are going to be leaving a gap, so I did it between that medium and large, and then we're just going to be taking a seam all the way around the tree skirt, so going through each of these sides, these edges, going all the way through. But we are then going to be closing it at this portion so that we can have this gap for turning. And then remember, the pattern here is that we have our tree skirt top matched with the right sides together of our tree skirt bottom, and then we have the batting. So I'm just going to go through, take a seam all the way around, being sure that I am leaving a gap on one of those sides so that we can turn this right side out later on. And then because there are a lot of edges to this, be sure that you are pivoting your fabric. So when you pivot, what this means is that you are going all the way down to the corner. When you get about, half of an inch, quarter of an inch away, you're putting your needle into your fabric, lifting up the presser foot, and then turning your fabric the number of degrees that's needed for that corner, and then putting the presser foot down and continuing sewing. So just really taking your time going through doing that for each of those edges, and then you can trim off any extra fabric you have. For that, I did do about a 1/2 inch seam allowance just so that I made sure I was getting all of those pieces together. And then I did clip that little inner portion so that it'd be a little flatter and smoother when it came time to turning this right side out. Then that gap you use, you're just going to turn your tree skirt out, and here is your tree skirt. It is basically almost done. I loved how it looked at this point. So what you're going to do for that gap that we did leave open, you're just going to kind of turn that fabric in on itself so it goes inside the gap, and then just pin this closed. And then we are just going to be top stitching this closed is how we will deal with that and getting our last final detail onto the tree skirt. But I did go ahead and just press everything one more time to make sure it was nice and flat and smooth before I did that final top stitch. I would highly recommend doing this just so you can make sure that everything is laying well with your tree skirt before you do that top stitch. So now for the top stitch, what we will be doing is starting just at one of the points, going all the way around with our top stitch, then going down that edge, doing the inside, and then doing the second edge. So this will close up our gap and give us just a really nice little detail for our tree skirt. Again, for this, I did about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch top stitch. It's really up to you how fine you want to do that. Just be sure that you do close that gap when you are doing your top stitch, so you don't want it to be too close to the edge where you don't pick up the fabric on the back. So here's what my top stitch looks like. It looks so nice and clean, and then from the back it looks good as well. So you can see I did a red bobbin with a white top stitch so that it kind of didn't show too much from the back or from the front. So at this point, everything is done with our tree skirt and it's ready to go onto our tree. So it's pretty simple to put on, so you just kind of wrap it around and then you can lay it in place. So here's what my tree skirt looks like. I love how it turned out. Again, this is for a 4-foot Christmas tree. So the final dimensions across are around 36 inches or so. There's even more dimensions listed in the Etsy pattern description if you're interested. I did try this out on a 2-foot tree, and I think this could work really well if you had this little tree on a table. So it's a tree skirt / tablecloth for the small one, but really it works great on either. Remember, there is that whole Etsy pattern available for this. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and happy holidays.